He might have escaped confinement, yet he possessed a singular and autonomous temperament. He rejected any form of conditional oversight. He sensed a desire to depart, feeling as though he had, in essence, settled his debt to the community for his actions. BURT Lancaster transcended the role of a mere film icon. He represented the ethical core of the entertainment industry. The individual whose portrayals in films such as Atlantic City and Elmer Gantry epitomized honesty and uprightness. This is precisely why the revelation of his concealed journal astonished the entire world. Within its pages, he unveiled the performers he considered the most malevolent from the era of cinematic splendor. Celebrities who, in his view, ascended to stardom via acts of brutality and deceit, so reprehensible that he felt compelled to break his silence. Did these represent the concealed realities underpinning their triumphs? Or merely the resentful vendettas of a legendary figure in the movie world? Accompany us on this exploration. The individuals listed there are bound to astonish you. At the forefront, Kirk Douglas, the aggressor whom Burt dreaded above all. Kirk Douglas occupied the premier position in BURT Lancaster's private roster because Lancaster perceived him as perilous. The film community revered Douglas for his intense allure. However, in private settings, Burt observed a person who employed that very fervor to overpower, frighten, and penalize others. And this stemmed from a much more sinister origin. The discord originated in the latter part of the 1950s when Lancaster detected Douglas influencing not just production choices, but also the destinies of susceptible performers. A particular event etched itself deeply into Burt's recollection: the abrupt dismissal of emerging actress Lisa Avery from a prominent endeavor in 1959. Burt was aware of the actual circumstances and documented them straightforwardly. She declined his advances, and he ensured her vanishing from the scene. This wasn't merely a statement, it constituted a charge of intentional reprisal. Burt was convinced that Douglas wielded authority as a tool of destruction, and he loathed him for that reason. Their interpersonal conflict ignited amid the production of Gunfight at the OK Corral. Douglas persistently meddled in selection processes, murmuring suggestions to filmmakers, rejecting performers he disfavored, and insisting on additional takes to emphasize his own presence. Lancaster approached him confidentially about it, but Douglas dismissed him with an icy grin. This industry favors those who seize what they desire. To Burt, those words validated all his suspicions. The arrogance, the mercilessness, the utter absence of remorse. From that instant, their animosity turned into a widely known fact. Douglas declined joint discussions. Burt steered clear of practice sessions whenever Douglas appeared. During professional banquets, they positioned themselves at distant points of the venue, resembling rival monarchs unwilling to recognize each other's sovereignty. A studio leader once remembered, whenever both received invitations, one invariably withdrew. By the closing years of the 1980s, their rivalry had solidified into permanence. No expressions of regret, no mellowing with the passage of time. Lancaster boycotted Douglas's accolade events. Douglas omitted any reference to Burt in his autobiographies. Ever since, the quietude separating them conveyed volumes more than any spoken dialogue. In the second spot, Elizabeth Taylor, the sovereign who governed via turmoil. Turmoil shadowed Elizabeth Taylor at every turn, but the genuine astonishment lay in the ferocity of her confrontations with BURT Lancaster, for he discerned in her a quality that the majority hesitated to acknowledge. The instant that solidified his aversion occurred before numerous bewildered production staff during the tumultuous creation of Cleopatra in 1962. Taylor entered the filming area, noticed a fellow performer adorned in attire whose hue resembled hers too closely, and unleashed such rage that the entire operation halted for almost half the day. Burt subsequently depicted that occurrence straightforwardly. She didn't merely exhibit outbursts. She initiated conflicts. Taylor managed a movie environment as her own combat zone, and anybody ensnared in the fray became an unintended casualty. She postponed sequences for extended periods, declined wardrobe trials, and occasionally disappeared without warning, rendering a whole group powerless. Burt abhorred the manner in which individuals ranging from seasoned overseers to anxious helpers suffered. But the occasion that genuinely altered Burt's perception of her transpired amid her partnership with Richard Burton. She didn't simply affect his professional path, she commandeered it entirely. Manuscripts were discarded without Burton perusing them. Supporting artists abruptly discovered themselves excised from ventures because Taylor worried they might divert from the on-screen rapport. A selection coordinator recollected her scanning a roster of participants and declaring, "Not that one. His appearance displeases me." The performer was terminated shortly thereafter. Burt deemed this abhorrent. In his eyes, it demonstrated that Taylor prioritized control over creative expression. She molded the film world through scheming, coercion, and dramatic displays of feelings. And nobody ventured to oppose her due to her renown. Years afterward, whenever her identity arose in conversations, Burt's demeanor allegedly stiffened immediately. No mending of bridges, no gentler outlook as years advanced, solely the conviction that Taylor personified a form of ruinous authority he declined to pardon. Occupying the third position, Marilyn Monroe, the celebrity who turned vulnerability into a tool of control. Monroe once arrived on location 3 hours behind schedule, surveyed her fellow actors, and proclaimed she wasn't prepared to proceed because the atmosphere seemed off. That solitary episode encapsulated precisely why Burt Lancaster found her intolerable. He didn't perceive a luminary. He viewed an individual who thought the whole sector ought to adapt to her capriciousness. The event that entrenched his bitterness unfolded during the disorderly making of Some Like It Hot in 1959. Film locations operate akin to bustling urban areas, and Monroe vanished without justification while more than 100 staff endured beneath scorching illumination, cosmetics dissolving, frustrations mounting. Hours passed before she casually returned, providing no remorse and requiring alterations to the segment that hadn't yet been captured. Burt noted in astonishment, postponement served as her instrument. Disorder functioned as her safeguard. To him, no true expert should employ such tactics. What intensified Burt's ire wasn't solely the tardiness. It was the cascading consequences she triggered. Dialogues were revised hastily because she experienced uncertainty regarding a phrase. Complete narrative threads shifted because she intuited another performer could capture a sliver of spotlight. All adjusted to prevent her from faltering, and Marilyn was cognizant of it. In hidden interactions, the cunning sharpened further. Monroe cultivated confidential ties with company leaders who stepped in at her behest to eliminate undesirables. A performer she disapproved of would abruptly earn the label of challenging and be ousted from an assignment. Burt detested this above all else. Professional paths demolished discreetly, imperceptibly for motives indefensible. An associate expressed it directly, her displeasure meant someone's dismissal. And although society eventually depicted her as delicate and sorrowful, Lancaster rejected that portrayal. He held that the movie business shielded her at the detriment of others, and the field suffered in duration, finances, and personal toll. In the fourth place, Spencer Tracy, the despot who commanded through dread. Individuals didn't murmur Spencer Tracy's name out of admiration. They murmured it due to apprehension of his potential reactions. That apprehension is exactly why Burt Lancaster found him unbearable. Burt loathed performers who abused team members, but Tracy transformed abuse into his distinctive approach. Anyone in proximity knew a single misspoken term could provoke a detonation. The antagonism between Burt and Tracy became unalterable after Burt observed a novice cosmetic specialist stiffen upon Tracy's entrance. Her limbs trembled so intensely she couldn't complete her task. When Burt inquired the cause, she whispered, "He hurled furniture at the previous assistant." Tracy offered no contrition. He didn't recall the act. To Burt, that was inexcusable. Aggression so routine it faded from memory. Throughout the making of Judgment at Nuremberg, Tracy's ire darkened further. His wrath was acute, abrupt, and directed at the most defenseless individual present. He'd isolate performers lacking established repute and compel them to rehearse dialogues until they succumbed to strain. One actor admitted to Burt, "He isn't aiming for the sequence to succeed. He seeks my breakdown." That lone remark kindled Burt's scorn. More egregious than the hostility was Tracy's deceitfulness. Upon confrontation, he altered strategies, menacing to depart, staging sentimental collapses, delivering impassioned monologues about misunderstanding. Overseers yielded, financiers implored, and the ensemble prepared for further eruptions of fury. Burt regarded this as timid and toxic. In his diary, he inscribed, "He penalized opposition and compensated terror." Their association was equally adversarial. Tracy ignored Burt's presence at association gatherings. Burt declined to commend Tracy during honors. Neither concealed the contempt for Lancaster. Tracy wasn't a creator with imperfections. He was a oppressor whose existence tainted every setting he inhabited. Fifth on the list, Mickey Rooney, the prankster who flourished on brutality. The simplest method to grasp why BURT Lancaster abhorred Mickey Rooney is straightforward. Rooney chuckled when others shattered. Not in seclusion, not through confidential chatter. He performed it publicly, boldly, and consistently. BURT could endure self-importance, disarray, even aggression. But viciousness masked as amusement was something he never absolved. The instant that sparked their conflict occurred at MGM in the latter 1960s. BURT entered for a discussion and encountered a spectacle he couldn't erase. Rooney positioned centrally on the filming platform, ridiculing a supplementary performer's speech impediment. Staff averted gazes, discomfort. The youth's expression crumpled until he departed the area in distress. Rooney grinned and called out, "If jokes offend you, this profession isn't for you." To others, it was awkward. To BURT, it was repugnant. Rooney's conduct pattern was common knowledge. He targeted the most vulnerable: females, aides, substitutes, novice actors lacking leverage to retaliate. A script overseer confided in BURT, "You hope he overlooks you. If noticed, your day is ruined." And it extended beyond spoken malice. Rooney's unions disclosed a far gloomier aspect. Companions demeaned to subordinates, exposed to sentimental volatility and volatile disputes. BURT despised how the film community dismissed it as Rooney's quirk, as if celebrity justified anguish. Their individual rivalry intensified at a philanthropic event in the 1970s. Rooney jested about BURT's solemn performance manner, labeling him the fellow who lost his grin. Rather than chuckling, BURT replied with a frosty gaze that silenced the gathering. Subsequently, BURT rejected joint appearances or media sessions with Rooney. When creators proposed collaboration, his response remained consistent. "I avoid partnering with individuals who injure others for entertainment." No resolution ever occurred, no easing of tensions with maturity. Their enmity stayed as keen in personal dialogues as at its inception. Thus, upon learning BURT Lancaster's disclosures, which entry on his roster astonished you the greatest? And do you believe these celebrities were genuinely wicked or merely casualties of the film industry's most sinister whispers? Share your opinions in the comments. And remember to endorse, distribute, and follow for additional unrevealed tales from the era of cinematic elegance. He could have achieved liberation, but he embodied a distinctive and self-reliant essence. He shunned any kind of supervisory constraint. He experienced a yearning to exit, believing he had essentially compensated his obligation to society for his deeds. BURT Lancaster exceeded being simply a screen celebrity. He stood as the principled foundation of the movie realm. The person whose interpretations in works like Atlantic City and Elmer Gantry symbolized moral soundness. That's the reason the unearthing of his hidden diary shocked all. In it, he revealed the thespians he deemed the most wicked from the pinnacle period of films. Luminaries who, per his judgment, rose to prominence through savagery and trickery, so detestable that he couldn't remain mute any longer. Were these the veiled facts supporting their accomplishments? Or the acrimonious resentments of a cinematic myth? Come along with us. The identities on that compilation will astound you. First, Kirk Douglas, the hunter BURT apprehended most. Kirk Douglas was the initial entry BURT Lancaster positioned at the summit of his confidential catalog because Lancaster thought he was hazardous. The entertainment sector cherished Douglas for his vigorous appeal. But in secluded spaces, BURT witnessed a figure who utilized that identical vigor to subjugate, scare, and chastise. And it originated from a profoundly more ominous source. The friction started in the closing 1950s when Lancaster spotted Douglas controlling not only filmmaking determinations, but also the futures of defenseless thespians. One occurrence imprinted itself into BURT's mind: the unexpected expulsion of budding starlet Lisa Avery from a major 1959 initiative. BURT understood the reality and recorded it candidly. She refused, and he caused her erasure. This wasn't just a remark. It was an indictment of purposeful vengeance. BURT was persuaded Douglas handled influence like a blade, and he reviled him for it. Their private dispute burst forth during gunfight at the OK Corral. Douglas continually intruded in auditioning, murmuring to executives, discarding thespians he abhorred, and calling for extra filming to highlight himself. Lancaster challenged him in solitude, but Douglas rejected him with a chilly smirk. This locale honors men who grasp what they crave. To Burt, that phrase affirmed everything. The conceit, the pitilessness, the total void of ethics. From then, their loathing became a public mystery. Douglas shunned combined conversations. Burt evaded preparations if Douglas attended. At sector feasts, they occupied far-apart seats like two rulers declining to accept the other's dominion. One manager even noted, if both were summoned, one always backed out. By the end of the 1980s, their enmity had petrified. No remorse, no gentling with years. Lancaster snubbed Douglas's award gatherings. Douglas never cited Burt in his life stories. Thereafter, the hush between them spoke louder than utterances. Second, Elizabeth Taylor, the monarch who dominated via disorder. Disorder trailed Elizabeth Taylor incessantly, but the true jolt was how fiercely she conflicted with BURT Lancaster. Since he perceived in her something most were too terrified to confess. The moment that fixed his antipathy transpired before hundreds of amazed team members during the turbulent Cleopatra filming in 1962. Taylor stepped into the area, saw another actress in a gown too similar in shade to hers, and exploded with such anger that the work stopped for almost half a day. Burt afterward described that instant plainly. She didn't have fits. She waged battles. Taylor handled a film location like her private war ground, and anyone in the line of fire was incidental loss. She held up shots for hours, turned down garment sessions, and at times vanished without alert, leaving a full crew impotent. Burt despised how folks from experienced leaders to tense helpers endured. But the event that really shifted how Burt saw her happened during her time with Richard Burton. She didn't merely sway his vocation, she took command of it. Texts were turned away without Burton viewing them. Fellow stars suddenly learned they were cut from endeavors because Taylor dreaded they detracted from the bond. One hiring official remembered her browsing a participant list and stating, "Not him. His look offends me." The thespian was dismissed soon after. Burt found this repulsive. To him, it evidenced that Taylor cherished supremacy over craftsmanship. She fashioned the movie scene through plotting, bullying, and sentimental drama. And no one risked defying her because of her celebrity. Long after, when her name came up in dialogues, Burt's voice supposedly turned rigid right away. No patching up, no milder view with time, only the faith that Taylor represented a type of devastating force he wouldn't excuse. Third, Marilyn Monroe, the icon who armed weakness. Monroe once entered a location 3 hours delayed, looked at her partners, and declared she wasn't set to labor because the vibe seemed incorrect. That one instance summarized exactly why BURT Lancaster couldn't endure her. He didn't see a megastar. He saw someone who felt the whole trade should modify around her inconsistency. The occurrence that anchored his grudge came during the messy production of Some Like It Hot in 1959. Movie areas run like busy city sections, and Monroe vanished without reason while over 100 workers waited under hot beams, cosmetics running, irritations rising. Hours later, she returned leisurely, giving no regret and insisting on modifications to the part not yet filmed. Burt wrote in disbelief. Hold-up was her tool. Perplexity was her barrier. To him, no specialist should use either. What drove Burt's fury wasn't just the lateness. It was the ripple impact she created. Parts were rewritten quickly because she felt unsure about a word. Whole plot lines altered because she thought another actress might steal a bit of focus. Everyone adapted to stop her from crumbling, and Marilyn recognized it. In the background, the scheming became even more acute. Monroe kept personal links with studio heads who meddled when she wished someone removed. An actor she disliked would suddenly be called hard to collaborate with and ousted from a venture. Burt hated this more than anything. Livelihoods destroyed quietly, unseen for causes no one could protect against. One co-worker said it frankly, if she scowled, someone was unemployed. And while the Globe later portrayed her as breakable and pitiful, Lancaster refused that story. He thought the industry safeguarded her at the cost of all others, and the business paid in hours, funds, and human price. Fourth, Spencer Tracy, the autocrat who guided by horror. People didn't whisper Spencer Tracy's name from esteem. They whispered it because they feared what he could do next. That fear is precisely why BURT Lancaster couldn't tolerate him. Burt despised actors who ill-treated crews, but Tracy made ill-treatment his hallmark method. Anyone near him knew one wrong phrase could spark an outburst. The hostility between Burt and Tracy became permanent after Burt saw a young makeup worker freeze at Tracy's approach. Her hands shook so much she couldn't finish. When Burt asked why, she muttered, "He threw a chair at the last one." Tracy didn't apologize. He didn't remember. To Burt, that was unpardonable. Violence so usual it became unmemorable. During judgment at Nuremberg, Tracy's temper grew darker. His anger was sharp, sudden, aimed at the weakest. He'd trap actors not yet famous and make them repeat lines until they broke. One actor told Burt, "He doesn't want the scene right. He wants me shattered." That sentence sparked Burt's contempt. Worse than aggression was Tracy's manipulation. When challenged, he changed, threatening to leave, having emotional fits, giving speeches about being misunderstood. Directors gave in, producers begged, cast braced for more rage. Burt found this cowardly and harmful. In his journal he wrote, "He punished defiance and rewarded fear." Their relationship was just as hostile. Tracy wouldn't greet Burt at meetings. Burt wouldn't honor Tracy at events. Neither hid the disdain. To Lancaster, Tracy wasn't an artist with faults. He was a tyrant who polluted every space. Fifth, Mickey Rooney, the jester who prospered on savagery. The fastest way to see why Burt Lancaster despised Mickey Rooney is easy. Rooney laughed when people cracked. Not privately, not in gossip. He did it openly, proudly, often. Burt could handle ego, chaos, violence. But cruelty as humor was unforgivable. The moment that ignited